between the different good. We can see how it differs between the different categories and different organizations. So, for example, you can notice from the third row that the for-profit organizations tend to operate with the shortest runaway, and they have finance for less than 3 months quite often. But then at the same time, the whole school models, we work together, with organize the studies for the students, and they might have the tuition fees or the governmental payments. They runaway is the longest one. And then when we are looking like what kind of funding the innovations are having currently, they are usually combining three kind of sources of funding. So there's a lot of donations and grants used to create the innovations, and then that is followed by costs or funded by cost of the service or product they are having. And then, of course, there is the self-finance thing as well. So we might say that even though the big part of the innovations we are doing in the education are not for profit, the innovators find them so interesting and so important that they are still willing to invest their own money into the not-for-profit operations. And most of the innovators we are having currently, they are looking for venture capital or donations within the next 6 months. And when we are looking like how this funding would be used, we can see that most of the 100 innovators are in the quick scaling up phase. So they are looking eagerly different kind of possibilities, how they can scale up their work and how they can make it more widely available for people around the world. And then, but when we are looking at how the innovations are currently evaluating the work they are doing, we might find one reason why sometimes receiving the funding can be a little bit difficult. So most of the innovators at the moment are relying on the internal evaluation, and only a small part of the innovators are having some kind of independent external evaluation or some kind of third-party models they are using as a way to know how the innovation has been working. And then, if we look the educator-led practices, we find something totally different. So here we actually see that there is a big part, the majority of these innovators use anecdotal evidence, meaning testimonials or asking from teachers, which might fall short when looking for funding from the grant or donation givers or from a venture capital market. So to sum up, I think there are 4 things. First of all, between the 100 innovators, scaling up is the primary need. Then secondly, innovation outcomes are explained in 2 ways. So they are explained through actions or they are explained through impact. And when we are hearing the panel discussion about the funding possibilities and education funding in general, I believe that the impact could be more in-depth way to kind of like get information about the funding and get the funding in a long run. Then the for-profits go with the shortest runaway, and the whole school models have the longest one at the moment. And then the educator-led classroom practices differ from others in a way that they are usually not yet as widely spread than the not-for-profits or for-profit organizations. And therefore, it kind of like looks like that there could be a good collaboration happening between the educator-led practices and the whole school models, since they could then contribute to each other, and the whole school models could give more possibilities for educator-led practices to spread around the world. But within these words, over to Saku, and let's get the panel discussion to begin.
Thank you, Lasse. So money, money, money. One question to you, and I'm not talking about personal life, I'm talking about education and your organization or whatever. Which one of you would like to get more money to be spending for the work you do? Okay, which one of you is extremely happy and there is no need for extra resources? Okay, so there is need and so on. The last question is, which one of you have been waiting eagerly to hear about waiting eagerly this next session, which is all about funding, thinking big and so on? Okay, so let's get the session going. John, Essi, and Mabel, welcome to the stage. You can take the places here. And like mentioned, we are having a short presentations of three really remarkable organizations: Lego Foundation, Big Change, and Yidan. And first of all, they will explain briefly what they do, what is the organization. Then we are having a short chat, and at the end, we are going to be opening up for your questions as well. So without further ado, we'll start with John. So please.
Great. Is the mic working okay?
Yep.
Super.
You can be standing up, you can do it sitting down.
I'll stay relaxed. If that's okay. Well, it's great. Thanks very much for having the opportunity to be here today. Just getting orientated with the slides. Where are we here? Are we popping up?
Yep.
Right, here we go. So, as Saku mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Lego Foundation, and wanted to give you a bit of background ahead of getting into the dialogue around what it is that we do within the foundation, because I think it is pertinent to the discussion point. Very much consistent with the dialogues that you've had over the course of the last 2 days, the Lego Foundation has spent quite a bit of time over the preceding 5 or 6 years really understanding what it is that we wanted to fund and scale throughout the world. We had gone through a period of activities that had focused on programmatic support in the area of learning through play, and I'll come into what that means, and building up the knowledge with regards to that. And as a consequence, it really honed in our sharpness of focus around what it is that we wanted to do in the world. And that is specifically to reach all areas of a child's life with learning through play. And learning through play is very sharply defined by us on the back of some extensive research which has been conducted in combination with a number of academic partners around the world, primarily led by Cambridge University, in order to really specify what are the characteristics of learning through play that enable the learner to have the maximum output from the actual process that they're going through. And as you can see on this slide, there's the 5 characteristics which we have been defined through that research. Is the learning experience joyful? Is it actively engaging? Is it meaningful? Is it iterative? Is it socially interactive? And what the research has indicated is if we can get those components together in the learning environment, it is the optimum way in which children can go through the developmental process in terms of the primary domains of skill development. Having articulated and defined what it is in terms of the characteristics of play that we want to see in the activities that we are looking to scale, we then go about it through a process which we call the Wheel of Impact. And that involves us developing programs of activity which then are supported by research that develops evidence to support the outcomes that are generated from that particular approach. And then once we have that, we then shift to buy-in in order to convince the key stakeholders for adoption. And those stakeholders may be a village elder, they may be a municipality leader, they may be a minister of education, they may be a bureaucrat. We go through the process of identifying who is it, who are the key individuals that we need to reach out to and convince in order to achieve adoption. That then informs us more about what it is that we need in terms of an evolution of the process in order to refine it for more adoption and more scale. And that brings us back to the program again, in order to do refinement, to identify what are the key elements to enable scale and what are those things that need local adaptation in order to get more embrace. That then spawns more evidence, and so the wheel continues to turn, and we continue to iterate around that approach so that hopefully the wheel gets bigger and bigger and we engulf more children through that process. In order for this change to last, it's really important that we ensure that we act upon all elements of the ecosystem. So as a consequence, we have activities that focus on primary caregivers, parents. We have activities that focus on teachers and pedagogues. We have processes that focus on systems. And then we have activities that also focus on governments in order to ensure that the whole ecosystem surrounding the children and affecting the change are identified and worked upon in order to make it lasting. So that's our approach. We've started with defining what it is that we want to scale very clearly with underlying research. Then what we do is we ensure that we have a thorough approach of continuing to refine and iterate to ensure that we are taking on board the barriers and resistance to adoption, and then identifying either new programmatic adaptations or establishing new evidence in order to get the broader buy-in. And then we work on all of the stakeholders surrounding the area of change to ensure that we get sustainable adoption. So that then translates into, say, some specific examples. So we have initiatives of where we believe that we need to focus. An example would be, how do we bring technology into the classroom, but in a playful way that still ensures child agency? Or what is the way in which we can develop low-cost early childhood development access that can then be scaled across the globe? And I show here an example of this, and this is the work that we've been doing with BRAC, a wonderful institution that we've been partnering with, and I know you've heard from Devon earlier in the week around the work that we're doing with them. But it's a perfect illustration of how we've set off our initiative of looking at low-cost examples of early childhood development. And we have, in combination with BRAC, identified ways in which we can use adolescent girls in rural villages as effectively the parapedagogues that are trained by BRAC on key methodologies of learning through play for early childhood. We then engage community leaders in terms of supporting the implementation of the early childhood centers that we call play labs in the different settings around the country. And that through that process, we get great participation of the children into the early childhood centers. And that is being tested in Bangladesh, in Uganda, in Tanzania. And through that cross-cultural testing, we're identifying what are the key common elements in order to secure success, and what are those things that really require specific local adaptation in order to make it culturally relative in that environment. Through that, BRAC is now achieving a lot of success in starting to talk with other funders around the potential expansion of the toolkit, if it were, into new geographies that are of particular interest to those funders. It's also stimulating us to place research around what is happening to the children that go through that play lab process. What's the type of social emotional development or resilience impact that participation in the play labs is having? What are the types of things that are taking place that are enabling those children to be more school ready? So that's the type of research that we're placing alongside. So you can see the whole three aspects of the wheel, the programmatic aspects, the buy-in, has BRCA taken it to other funders, and then that stimulation of evidence that will then feed the next iteration of the process. So that's trying to illustrate the type of way in which we're making it come to life.
Impressive, thank you. And have a lot of questions, but let's get back to them in a minute. Maybe we can continue with Mabel.
Mabel, there you go.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with the HundrED family. Yes, so it's a great honor to be here to introduce to you the Eden Prize. And so before I go into details about the prize itself, I want to introduce to you our founder. So this young gentleman on the screen is our founder, Charles Chen Eden, and he is a very successful businessman. And he co-founded the largest internet company in China. And that company is called Tencent. I'm not sure how many of you heard about Tencent. Well, great. So how many of you are Wechat users who have to? Oh, great. So let me introduce a little bit about Wechat. So Wechat is an app that combines the functions of PayPal, WhatsApp, and Instagram. So all of them in one app. So we often have a joke. So if you have a Chinese friend who live in China, and you don't have the Wechat app, then you probably will lose this friend. Because every Chinese people living in China use that app every day. So you do this for a direct communication, instant messenger, and when you go to supermarket or even a wet market, you just go and open the app, and then you can pay by your e-wallet. So they don't bring cash anymore in China. So this is a very successful business, and then he retired. I mean, our founder Charles retired at an early age of 32. And yes, very early, retired. But then he chose to step in another life career, which is philanthropy. And that's why he set up the Eden Prize. And why he set up this prize is because in his belief, education is the driving force for social progress. This is one of the beliefs that he dipped inside in his mind, and he kept reminding us almost every day. And so because of his very successful business, he did earn some money, I would say, but he is very humble. He believed that this money he earned are coming from the public, coming from the society. So that's why he should put it back to the society to make social improvement. So that's why he chose to set up his second career, I would say, in the philanthropy world. So this is some history of and some introduction about our founder. So what is the Eden Prize? So far, it is the largest educational prize in the world. Why I'd say so, I will explain in a minute. And then it's actually focused on two areas. First is education research, and the other is education development. Because we believe that research and development should go hand in hand if you want to make improvement or progress in the education system. You can't just think about something and then you want to implement something or do something without any research background to support. But at the same time, if you are a researcher, you have to do a lot of research about education. You can't just stop at that point. You have to think about what you could do to make the progress and then put into practice. So that's why the two go hand in hand. We can't neglect one and then just focus on the other. So what makes the prize so big? It's mainly because of the money, from the media point of view. So each of the laureates of the Eden Prize will receive around $3.9 million worth of award. So that's why it's so far the biggest award in the world, focusing on education. And we have two laureates annually. We will select two. So one is education research and the other is education development. And that $3.9 million were divided into two equal halves. So the first half, around 1.9 million, is a cash prize. So mainly we give out that cash prize to the laureate because we recognize the contributions in the field of education. So that's really a reward to them. We don't have very strict guidelines on how the person will use that prize of money. But the other parts, another 1.9 million, is what we focus very much. We call them the project funding. So it is because they have these brilliant ideas, they have been doing so well, we believe that if we provide them even more resources, they can amplify the effect and then benefiting even more people in the world. So that's our logic. And this project funding is the very special characteristics that differentiate the Eden Prize from other prizes, I believe. And that project funding would encourage the foundations to work or to accompany the laureates in at least 3 consecutive years. So we will, I would say, I prefer not to use the word monitoring, but we will walk together with them and to see what kind of support we could provide, and then letting the laureates to become the spokesperson, and then we will have different conferences around the world to showcase the successful stories so that we encourage people to replicate the projects, replicate the ideas. So this is the characteristics of our prize. So you may be interested in knowing what are the judging criteria of the prize, which is, I think, very similar to HundrED indeed. We look for innovative ideas, sustainable and transformative, as well as future-oriented. So this is very general characteristic, the criteria, but the nominators have to explain how transformative it is, how innovative it is, and how it is supposed to be able to solve the problems that we could be facing in the future society. And just a very brief showcase on what are the laureates. So we are relatively young. We are just almost 2 years old. And then we have the first prize in 2017, last December. And then next month, literally actually the 9th of December, next month in Hong Kong, we will be having the second award presentation ceremony. And so these 2 gentlemen are the laureates of this year. And for the research laureates is Professor Larry Hedges. It's a professor in statistics at Northwestern University. And he developed the meta-analysis. So we understand that there are a lot of different researchers who are studying about education system, education development, etc. So his approach is that he look into every different this type of research and then make an analysis about all these findings, and then propose what is the best way we could do as a teacher, as a principal, as a policymaker, or as a government, what we should do to make really real improvement in the education system. And the next laureate is the Professor Anna Agarwal, is the founder and CEO of edX, almost the first online learning platform, and it is now basically benefiting over 17 million participants across the world, and having network with 300 top institutes around the world offering 2,000 free online courses. So it's very amazing. And just very quick ideas, because we are, as the Eden Prize Foundation, we mainly focus on giving out a prize. But apart from that, we also do some kind of research, thought leadership. So this is what I want to share with you, is the worldwide Educating for the Future Index. So when you go to our website, you can see this. So this research is we commissioned the Economist Intelligence Unit, and then it is the first and the only study so far that's studying the input of the education system rather than the output. So the PISA from OECD mainly focus on the performance, student performance, but we are studying what are the input on the society, for example, on the different level, like the education policy level, teaching environment, and also the socio-economic environment. So what are these elements putting into the education system would make the students, whether they are well equipped for the learning the skills for future society. So we are very looking forward to know about this result. Will be announced next month again at the Eden Prize Summit. And just for your reference, last year in this index, we have examined 35 different economies. So in last year's results, the best economies from this research is, performing the best is New Zealand. And I'm not sure whether Finland will be, become the first next time. So let's see next month. And
exciting.
Yes, final wordings is that in this index, we also highlight and suggest there are 6 future skills that every economy should include in their curriculum, so as to equip our students of today knowing what we need to tackle the challenges in the future economies and societies. So this includes leadership skills, interdisciplinary skills, creativity, analytical skills, digital and technical skills, entrepreneurial skills, as well as global awareness. So this is very important for us. And so if you want to know more about us, please go to our website, and we are also in Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. And for sure, Wechat. Yes, thank you so much.
And Essie before Wechat.
Yep. So I'm Essie North. I'm from an organisation called Big Change that comes from the UK, and actually Big Change is slightly different in that we started 5 years ago when a group of our founders, Holly and Sam Branson, Princess Beatrice, really actually started with a question. So they recognised that big change was needed in how we support our young people, that we need to rethink the way that we're setting young people up to thrive in life and not just in exams. But they didn't know what was the best way of getting there. And so we've been on a journey over the last 5 years to really look at how can we be the best catalyst for positive change, not just treat the symptoms of a broken system, but really kind of look at how can we invest in actually rethinking how the system operates so that we can create less of those problems in the future. And so where we started by doing. So it started by raising money and then supporting projects that were long-term system change ideas, because one of the big insights we had at the beginning was there wasn't enough funding for early-stage ideas that had bold ambitions for long-term system change. There was more funding available once you'd done your RCT and you had a lot of proof of concept and programmatic funding, but actually if you were thinking really big about something that needed to change at a systemic level, it was actually quite hard to get capital, and there was quite little kind of risk capital in that space. And so we wanted to look at, from the business sector and from other sectors, how has change happened in other areas, and actually what can we learn from different principles of change. And so we took a lot of the ideas from tech incubators, from venture capital, movement building, to actually think about how do we drive change in the kind of education space. So it started by providing early stage seed funding for long-term system change ideas in the UK. An example of one of those is actually Voice 21, which I saw in the yearbook with HundrED, which is a brilliant organisation. So we gave them, we were the first partner at Voice 21 when it was just an idea within School 21. We gave them support to take their idea from that school, and actually now it's in 250 schools across the UK. They're training over 2,000 teachers. And so they're actually, but not just scaling their idea and thinking differently, but they're also looking at how do we change a policy level to make sure that oracy is on the same level as numeracy and literacy in terms of what we value. And those are the kind of ideas that we were supporting there. Over kind of the journey, we realized that supporting these ideas and giving that early stage kind of risk capital and partnering with them in a very flexible way so that they could pivot and learn and really think about what was the right approach was really important part of what we did. But actually we kind of really needed to be more proactive in terms of understanding the system and where are there particular gaps or the opportunities where you can have the biggest leverage. And so we did more kind of research and understanding about what are the kind of gaps and hotspots in the system, that if we focus on those, they can have a really kind of big change. So we started being more proactive in terms of identifying outcome areas where we were going to allocate our funding. And so Oracy actually was one of them. We then kind of broadened out and supported a cohort of different projects, looking at early years, looking at schools, looking at kind of health visitors and place-based projects. So there's a Voice 21 are now doing an operation with Bradford, so taking the whole city and looking at kind of how are we working together with all of the different services. And so that also we're looking at early years, teachers thriving, and exclusions as kind of some of the areas which are real hotspots for change. And so that's been the second kind of insight, was around kind of really being proactive, really understanding the system and where our funding could really kind of move the needle. The third insight that we had, which actually resonates a lot with some of the conversations from this summit, is that it's all very well and good supporting those innovations from the bottom, really understanding the system and where change is needed, but actually there's a mindset shift that's needed, that these ideas can only go so far if there isn't a broader shift around actually the fact that change is needed, and we need to look at the conditions for change. And so that means looking at the policy environment, it means really looking at how do we engage parents to really understand and redefine what success looks like and what does it mean for young people to thrive in life. And so actually we've started to, in the last kind of year and a half, bring together cross-discipline research, so bring together economists looking at the future of work and automation, neuroscientists, philosophers, business leaders, educators, teachers, young people, to really look at what is the case for change. How do we really popularize this conversation beyond the kind of converted, I suppose, which a lot of us in this room are. We understand this change is urgent. How do we extract that learning from a lot of the research that's already happening? OECD, for example, do amazing reports, but they're big. The general public aren't going to be reading them. How do we extract some of those insights and make them popular, to create more of this mindset shift, to really broaden the audience, to recognize that big change is needed? So this kind of third insight was really around that mindset shift and actually looking at the kind of broader ecosystem that's needed and actually learning from how change has happened. So we're currently a piece of research that we're working on, which actually we've partnered with Think Global School and some partners there, Joanne McPike, to actually look at what can we learn from where change has happened and how that change has happened. And so looking beyond kind of the amazing what Finland is doing now to actually what have they done over the last 30 years that have enabled that, the cross-party long-term strategy, which is really thinking about who do we want to be as a country. I mean, that is an amazing insight that other countries can take. Looking at kind of where schools have really managed to scale what their practice is doing, like School 21 and Voice 21 have done. And how can we extract those insights of how change happened and make them not only accessible to other pioneers, but also look at, if you're a business leader and you believe this change needs to happen, what can you do? How can you take on more apprenticeships, change your hiring so you're looking at potential versus just skills and exams, not just skills, looking at exams and university. If you're a parent, what can you do? And so that's what we want to do, is really activate a broader audience around this change.
Thank you. A few questions before taking few questions from the audience. There's two ways, if we simplify, there's two ways that change happens. One of them is incremental, meaning step by step slowly, and then the other one is radical, disruptive, and so on. And if you're looking for practically every other industry at the moment, the change has been quite disruptive. There's Uber, there's Wechat, there's PayPal, there's Airbnb, there's Google, there's Amazon, and so on. In education, one might say is that none of this has happened. There's not even one kind of like dramatic innovation that is changing everything. So how do you see the change happening in education? Is it a good thing that it's incremental? Do you think that there's something more radical needed? And how do you see it? Because it's not a simple thing. John?
Yeah, I think radical has happened, but not to the established system. We have a tendency to look into the established education structures and say, well, they're pretty much the same as what they were when our grandparents went to school. But then if you think about education more from a skills development, knowledge, access, then the internet has truly transformed them. So any child has the opportunity to go away in the evening and study a subject matter to great depth. I say any child, but many children have that access much more freely than when I was a child. And many children are using that as a very effective way in which effectively they're pursuing their interests. So I think we have to blend together what's happening outside of the formal systems and perhaps then think through, well, what changes would we like to see in the formal system in order to provide the freedom? Because I think the radicalization and the ideation is definitely there. From our perspective, the issue is that we are consuming so much of children's time with antiquated approaches that is inhibiting them from embracing the things that are readily available to them. So I think it's that time access and the structures that we're putting them through is perhaps an interesting discourse for us to have.
Mabel, do you want to comment?
Yeah. I agree that technology actually changed the whole learning environment and the techniques that we are using. For example, what I mentioned, the development laureates week this year, the edX, it's actually something that like 30 or 40 years ago, you won't believe there would be something you can go online, take a free course offering from Harvard, Cambridge. You won't be able to think you have the ability to do that. But is it? Now you can do that. You can learn literally anything from the internet. You can get anything for free. And then you can choose what to learn, where to learn, how to learn, and what to learn. So it's really incredible. So technology really changed the whole thing. Something like even the flipped classroom, it's a radical change, I believe. But at the same time, why we think that the change in education is not like in the business world, it's because the education's ecosystem involves so many different stakeholders. So if we want to have a very radical change, it means every parties have to involve and get into this change. So it is really difficult. But I believe we are changing in a very positive way. This is very important. So we know we are changing positively, then we should embrace every little change. And I very much agree with one of my colleagues saying that if changes, and a little bit changes, like when there is a small drops of change in the oceans, and when you give it some time and you look back, this every single drops in the ocean united together become an unstoppable sea of change. So this is very important.
I would really agree that kind of there's a lot happening in the informal system. I think the formal system, there's something needed. The disruption, I feel, is at the root in terms of what are we educating for. And so at the moment, there's a lot of incremental change because we're being held by what the goal is. And in a lot of cases, that's exam results in university rather than thinking about what do young people need for life. And I believe if we shift that orientation, then actually we can unlock a huge amount of change which is ready, and the ideas and the solutions are there. It's just we need to allow and create the conditions where they can fly.
Let's get the mics ready. I have one short question, short answers please as well, even though this is really complicated. Looking for example, the Mabel's list, there's so much discussion about the future of education, having words like 4Cs, 6Cs, creativity, empathy, and so on. At the same time, from your point of view, there's a question of impact. And so on. So how do you measure impact on 4Cs, 6Cs, and so on, because they are really difficult to measure?
They are, but there's a fair amount of research that is developing now around the outcomes. So I think what we need to tap into is that collective knowledge and look to amplify it through implementations that are clearly illustrating. So one of the areas we're looking into is placing RCTs that will enable us to establish
Perfect.
that.
Let's have a few questions from the audience. Anyone willing to start, please do raise your hand.
I just had a question.
Can you briefly introduce yourself as well?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Josh Schachter with Community Share in Arizona. You know, we live in a world where we've created these things called nonprofits and for-profits and government entities, and you've talked a lot about the idea of ecosystems. And I wonder, from a philanthropic perspective, whether we need to think about how do we invest in how an ecosystem works in terms of relationships and networks, because there's a tendency to focus on dots. And I wonder if we need to think about how do you invest in the weaving and the sort of interstitial tissue within a network, which is a lot sort of messier and complicated, but I wonder if investing in those weavers and networks will allow us to move the needle as a system versus investing in the dots, and how do we build relationships between dots across discipline areas?
Anyway, Essi.
This is actually one of the biggest kind of insights that we've had in working with a lot of our project partners, but also kind of over the last couple of years as we've been looking at kind of how does big change actually happen, and it's the area that we're kind of focusing on now, is how do you connect up? Because the ideas are there, the solutions are there, how do you kind of join the dots? We've actually used the term kind of interstitial tissue quite a lot in terms of how do we not only kind of support that role ourselves and invest in it, but also look at kind of where it's happening elsewhere and help support those networks. So I think the only way this change is going to happen is if we all work together, is if we kind of build networks. And I think things like HundrED and bringing together all of you guys, the connections that happen by being in one place and by realizing that we've got a lot to learn and to share is actually really, really valuable.
Perfect. One more.
Hello, my name is Xueding Li from Belgium. My question for you is, what do you see as the purpose of education? And I'm looking for kind of a longer answer rather than what we might typically expect as happiness or thriving and all that. So I'm looking for kind of a more comprehensive view for really what is education for. So I'm interested in your views here.
So in theory, we are looking for a long answer in 30 seconds. And so on. Anyone want to try? It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, we use the kind of thing thrive in life, not just in exams, but within that is a lot in terms of young people's connection to themselves, to other people, to their community, and to the planet. So, and being able to kind of meaningfully contribute in their life, understanding who they are and how they can meaningfully contribute. So I think it's difficult to give much more than that in like 10 seconds, but...
If I could add that if we approach it more in the context of everybody in the planet living to be 120 years old, and retirement has been something that is a thing of the past, then if you look at the world in that lens and think that everyone has to reinvent themselves, redesign themselves multiple times through a lifetime, the concept of concentrating all of your education into the first 20 years of your life and then going on to be a productive, effective citizen within one narrow sphere, I think is an antiquated thought process. So the whole idea of education, I think, needs to be for lifelong learning. So how do we equip young children to be engaged lifelong learners? And are we setting them in the right course through the strictures we put them in their early years?
Let's have one more question.
Hi, I'm Abhijit from Project Defy in India. Just a small question. We talk about innovations, but I just wanted to ask if you do get projects that are more like inventions, reinventing education, reinventing the very definition of a school or the reinventing the very definition of what learning means? And if you do, then do you support them? Yeah.
Do you support inventions like actually coming up with a new way of doing school?
Can you see?
Yeah, I mean, we personally, we kind of operate at two levels at the moment. One is looking globally in terms of what change needs to happen and what can we learn from pioneers, and then we back projects kind of driving system change in the UK, and that's based on kind of what are the key things that need to change. So it would be open, but at the moment we don't, but that's kind of part of the future. So
I'm going to finish with two questions, one really practical and one kind of really complicated. So get ready for the complicated and let's start with the practical. There's a lot of innovators. There's innovators from 35 countries, 60 great innovators who have been doing fantastic things, and most of them need funding. So can they approach you? Can they send a mail? What should they do and so on? So if for example, Lego Found, that is the question they are thinking. Can I send a mail? What should I do? John?
If that's your simple question, I hate to get the hard one.
Simple.
Well, I think within the foundation, the Lego Foundation, we've defined what it is that we're looking to drive, and that's learning through play, as defined by our characteristics. We have a number of initiatives, 13 at the moment, looking at different ways in which we will implement learning through play. So if you have an idea, innovation that falls in, that incorporates those learning environments that I defined earlier, and it falls into one of those 13, we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Then, Yiran?
Yes, my answer is very simple. I do welcome every one of you to email me, and then I welcome every one of you to submit a nomination for the Eden Prize, because I believe in this room there are a lot of potential laureates of the Eden Prize in the coming years.
And the prize was 3.9 million.
3.9 million US dollars. Waiting you all. Waiting you all.
Essie?
So, as I mentioned, we're kind of, on the global level, we're more highlighting and learning from pioneers. So if you're doing something and looking at system change there, please do get in touch to be a part of that research. The aim is to create more demand for your projects and to raise, to get more people who want to fund them. In terms of our funding pot, we raise money in order to then fund projects. So at the moment, we've only got a fund for the UK, but planning on doing that more in the future. So if you want more kind of profile and demand and learnings from how you've driven change, then we're very happy on that. But at the moment, it's just a funded.
Okay, and then the complicated one. Good luck. We all have a feeling is that there's a big change needed, and at the same time we know that it is happening, but it's not simple. It's complicated and so on. So please forget your role as the CEO of Lego Foundation, Big Change, Yidan, as individual, but take all the know-how you have. If some foundation would give you 100 million and says that your goal is to make a massive change happen in the following 10 years in education, how would you spend that money? And they didn't get the question in advance. Which one wants to try? Mabel, the brave one.
I will first invite the two guys sitting next to me to pool the money together so we have a bigger pool. And then I have the talents. So maybe we can provide some kind of funding, and then we can, we know all the criteria. We have our emphasis on what are very crucial to be improved in the education system. And then maybe this pool of money could help to amplify the effect of many other education projects. Yeah.
Essie, big change.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there is one solution, and I don't think there's one right answer. So it wouldn't be to fund one particular idea or project, because I think this is genuinely a place where the change needs to come from many places. So I agree, for for me, it's always about collaboration, but I also believe that there does need to be this mindset shift, that we really need to challenge some of the deeply held assumptions about what we're educating for. And so really looking at actually how can we mobilize a broader audience to actually really care about this, because we care so much, but actually this isn't something which is on the top list of many people's priorities out there in terms of real change happening, because it doesn't feel urgent. And so in the same way that climate change needed to go from being a long-term kind of somebody else's problem, this needs to be shifted to everyone's responsibility now. And I think so I would spend it on kind of really looking at how do we mobilize people around that.
And John, briefly.
Yeah, I think the concepts of amplification and partnership are key. So I would definitely build on Mabel and Essie's point. The other thing I would do is look for areas that are at a tipping point. It's not something that we've spoken about, but it's something that I'm getting an increasing realization on. So many fantastic ideas that fail to expand because they're not impacting at a right tipping point. So just finding that tipping point to go after, and then I think you get more momentum.
Perfect. Thank you.